15 years on a desert island, without a forest, without tools, without hope of rescue. 60 people were reduced to 8, but they did not give up. This is a story of how people can survive where it seems impossible to survive. This story is about the island of Tromelin, a tiny patch of land lost in the waters of the Indian Ocean. Here, a small group of people had to fight for their lives for 15 years, one of the longest survival dramas in human history. This lifeless piece of land lies far from any civilization. The nearest landmass is Madagascar, and even that is 450 kilometers away. Imagine 450 kilometers of open ocean. The island is completely flat, its area barely reaching 1 square kilometer. The vegetation is sparse, rare, low-growing shrubs that barely cling to the sand, nests of seabirds, nothing more. Strong winds constantly sweep across this sandbank, blowing away anything that tries to grow higher than half a meter. During the day, the sun turns the sand into a scorching pan. At night, the temperature drops, and the cold chills you to the bone. But let's return to the story. The year 1761. France is at the peak of its power. Cardinal Richelieu is organizing a massive fleet construction, seeking to expand colonial possessions. French expeditions are sent to Canada and the Southern Islands with a simple goal: to seize new territories, gain access to resources, and strengthen the nation's economic influence. The result of this expansion is the creation of 2 major trading companies, the West India Company and the East India Company, for the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, respectively. Overseas trade is flourishing. The colonies supply sugar, cotton, coffee, cocoa, and spices. But to extract all this wealth, labor is required. A lot of labor. Vast plantations, endless fields under the scorching sun, all this required thousands of hands. The choice fell on Africa. At that time, the center of a very active slave trade. Black slaves were sent en masse to the plantations. By 1686, France had declared Madagascar, the island of Mauritius, and several smaller islands in the region as its possessions. A whole network of colonial holdings connected by sea routes was formed. On November 17, 1760, the transport ship Utile, a name that translates as useful, departed from the French port of Bayonne. Its destination was Madagascar. The ship followed a well-trodden route that hundreds of ships had taken before it. But the useful ship was not destined to return to its home harbor. On July 31, 1761, the ship was wrecked off the coast of the Île de Sable, Isle of Sand, as Tromelin was then called. A reminder, this is 450 kilometers from Madagascar. The vessel was heading to pick up a cargo of rice and spices with 122 French sailors on board. But besides the crew, between 100 and 200 slaves were languishing in the holds, in darkness, in stuffiness, chained to the wooden walls. The French sailors had illegally captured them in Madagascar and planned to sell them on the Ile de France, where a large slave market was located. Apparently, the crew decided not to sail an empty ship and to make some extra money on the side. Slavery was thriving in those times, and slaves were treated not as people, but as a profitable commodity, living cargo, walking money. Although the Utile was not a slave ship, the French clearly decided to seize the opportunity. The captives belonged to the Malagasy people, men and women who were to be profitably resold at the end of the voyage. But the ship never reached the slave market. it crashed on the reefs of the sandy islet. The impact was sudden. The crack of wood, screams, chaos. The castaways find themselves on a tiny patch of land. The island is a sandbank, 1,700 meters long and 700 meters wide. It is surrounded by coral reefs, sharp as razors. The surface is covered with sparse, low shrubs that scratch the legs and arms. Strong winds periodically sweep everything living from the island, which is why large trees do not take root here. Besides the nests of seabirds and turtles, there is absolutely nothing on the island. No shade, no shelter from the elements. According to the ship's log, which is still preserved in the archives of the city of Lorient, most of the slaves died during the disaster. The hatches to the holds were closed. Water rushed in, and the people had no chance. But 60 lucky ones managed to escape the sinking vessel. They, along with the 122 members of the French crew, found themselves on this lifeless sandy shore, soaked, in shock, but alive. It must be said, the survivors acted in an organized manner. Captain Jean de Lafargue lost his mind during the wreck. It is said he sat on the sand, staring blankly at the ocean, unresponsive. He was replaced by First Lieutenant Barthélemy Castellan du Vernet. Incidentally, the lieutenant lost his brother Leon in the disaster. He drowned in the hold. But du Vernet did not let grief break him. He led the men effectively, and discipline reigned among the crew. The crew managed to retrieve gear, weapons, provisions, and planks from the wreckage. They worked quickly, understanding that every salvaged item could be crucial for survival. But most importantly, they dug a well and reached drinking water. They dug with their hands, with planks, with scraps of metal, 5 meters deep into the sand. When moisture appeared at the bottom, it was a small miracle. It was this that saved their lives. They ate food from the ship, barrels of salt meat, bags of hardtack, everything they could pull out before the vessel completely disappeared underwater. Then they switched to local food, meat from turtles, seabirds, and eggs. According to the log entries, there was no serious starvation. Provisions were sufficient. Birds nested right on the ground and could be caught by hand. Turtles came ashore to lay eggs, making them easy to hunt. Lieutenant du Vernet ordered the construction of 2 camps, one for the crew, the other for the slaves. Even here, at the edge of the world, segregation was maintained. The French were not going to share shelter with slaves. They also built a forge from the ship's metal scraps, an oven, and a workshop to build a raft, on which the crew planned to leave the island as quickly as possible. The work went on around the clock. 2 months later, they managed to build a small boat from the wreckage of the ship. 2 months of hard labor under the scorching sun, fingers full of splinters, skin burned. But the raft was ready. 122 Frenchmen, sailors and officers, board the new boat named Providence and leave the sandy islet. They load the last of their water and food supplies. They check the rigging. 60 slaves remain on the shore, watching as their only hope sails away. The sailors promise to return for them at the first opportunity. They just need to wait a little, just a little bit. The boat moves away. The slaves remain on the island. They wave their hands. They shout, but the wind carries their voices into the ocean's void. Some crew members later claimed that their small boat simply wouldn't have held so many people. Overloading, they said, was a risk. Although it is quite possible that the French did not want to bother with the slaves, to feed them during the voyage, to share their already meager supplies, and they decided they would return later, when it was more convenient. 60 Malagasy people, men and women, are left on the Île de Sable. The sailors successfully reach Madagascar in just over 3 days. The sea was calm, the wind favorable. After a stop in Fall Point, where several men die of malaria, the cursed disease struck their weakened bodies. They are transferred to the island of Réunion, then called Bourbon, and then to Mauritius. Upon reaching Mauritius, the crew demanded that the colonial authorities send a ship to rescue the Malagasy slaves left on the island. Duvernay insisted, he demanded it. But a problem arose. At that time, France was fighting the 7 Years' War, and Mauritius was under threat of attack. Every ship counted. The governor decides that sending even one vessel to rescue slaves, and thereby weakening the Mauritius fleet, would be unwise. He refuses the sailors, coldly, without explanation. Slaves are not a priority. In fairness, this decision greatly angered Lieutenant Duvernay, who truly wanted to return for the slaves. According to his memoirs, he regretted his actions for the rest of his life. This story haunted him. Upon returning to France, he made the matter public, wrote letters, and sought meetings with influential people. For a time, the French intelligentsia was even stirred. The French writer Bernardin de Saint-Pierre wrote about it, calling the incident an example of the nation's moral decline. But with the end of the 7 Years' War and the bankruptcy of the East India Company, the castaways were simply forgotten. The war was over. New problems arose. 60 people on a distant island ceased to be a topic of discussion. And on the island, time dragged on with infinite slowness. After 2 years of agonizing waiting, the slaves understand no one is coming back for them. The promise was a lie. Or it was simply forgotten. They must save themselves. They build a raft. The work is difficult. There is almost no wood, so they have to use the remaining wreckage that the French did not take. 18 men on this small craft try to reach Madagascar on their own. 450 kilometers of open ocean. They cast off at dawn when the sea is calm. They wave to those left on the shore. But the raft smashes against the same cursed reefs that destroyed the Utile. The coral needles tear open the bottom. Water floods the deck. All 18 men perish. Their bodies wash ashore a few days later. A second attempt to leave the island was made 10 years after the shipwreck, in 1771. 10 years of waiting, hope, and despair. They build another raft, take another risk, and again they fail. The details of this attempt have not survived, but the result is known. No one was saved. In 1773, a ship called the Sauterelle spotted people on the shore and tried to approach the island. The people on the shore shouted, waved their arms, and lit fires, trying to attract attention. But the high reefs prevented the ship from getting close. A boat sent to the shore with 2 sailors was wrecked on the coral reef with the same crack with which the Utile had once been wrecked. One of the sailors managed to return to the ship. He was pulled aboard, bloodied, with ragged wounds from the coral. The second made it to the island's shore, but the ship left without him. The captain would not risk another boat. The sailor joined the castaways. As one of the surviving women later recounted, when he appeared on the island, only 3 men were still alive. All the others had died from disease, accidents, and despair. The sailor, his name has not survived, also attempts to build a raft and leave the cursed place. He has experience, knowledge, he is a sailor. On the third raft, 4 men and 3 women try to break through the coastal reefs. They wait for perfect weather, choosing the moment when the tide is at its peak. They set off, but they were never seen again. Their raft either broke apart just beyond the reefs or was carried out into the open ocean. Without food, without water, under the scorching sun, they would not have lasted more than a few days. And only 15 years after the shipwreck, on November 29, 1776, were the Malagasy people spotted by sailors from the corvette Dauphin. 15 years, 5,500 days. Approaching the island proved difficult. Those reefs were a deadly trap for any vessel. 3 boats failed to land, thrown back by the waves onto the sharp coral. Only the 4th, with an experienced helmsman, succeeded. On it was the ship's captain, Chevalier de Tromelin. It was after him that this sandy island was later named. Chevalier stepped onto the shore and saw a sight that struck him to the core. Of the 60 slaves, 8 had survived the 15 years. 7 women and an 8-month-old infant. Only women. All the men had perished in rescue attempts, from disease, from accidents. Arriving on the island, the captain found that the survivors were dressed in woven clothing made of feathers. Strange, almost primitive attire. They had managed to keep a fire going all those years, although there was not a single tree on the island, only small shrubs. They had learned to strike sparks from flint, collected dry moss, and carefully preserved the embers. The fire gave them warmth at night and protected them from despair. As long as the fire burns, there is life. The Malagasy had built huts from coral, crude but sturdy shelters. Most of the wood had been used to build the endless rafts for escape, so they had to improvise. They also erected an observation platform on the highest point of the island, a small rise, barely noticeable on the flat sandbank. From there, one could see the horizon in 360 degrees. Every day, someone would climb up and gaze at the ocean, hoping to see sails. 15 years of this ritual. These people came from the central highlands of Madagascar. They had lived in the mountains, among forests and rivers. They had no experience with fishing or seamanship. This environment, sand, salt, endless water, was completely alien to them. Most died in the first months after the wreck. They couldn't cope psychologically. They gave up. Those who remained alive continued to hope for rescue. They fed on birds, eggs, sea turtles, and the rare fish that swam to the island from beyond the coral reefs. Fishing was not very successful. They had no proper gear, only improvised hooks made from metal scraps and lines woven from plant fibers. But there was enough food. Hunger did not kill them. Most importantly, there was fresh water on the island. They had managed to dig a well, 5 meters deep into the sand. The water was brackish, but drinkable. It was largely because of this that they survived for so many years. Without water, they would not have lasted a month. A question surely arises. What happened to the slaves after their rescue? Were they sent back to the plantations or resold at slave markets? After all, they were still formally someone's property. No, they were taken to Mauritius, where Governor Jacques Maillard declared them free people. He personally met them at the pier and read the decree of emancipation. These people had been through hell, and returning them to slavery would have been monstrous even by the standards of the time. Maillard offered to send them home to Madagascar at the state's expense. They refused. After 15 years on the island, they had no home left. Their villages had disappeared, their relatives were dead or had forgotten them. They decided to stay in Mauritius. The governor also had the survivors baptized, a formality, but an important one for Christian society. The boy was named Jacques, in honor of the governor himself. His mother was baptized Eve. Her Malagasy name was Semiavu. The infant's grandmother was named Dauphine, after the corvette that had saved them. It was symbolic. These were all who managed to survive. The other women died from malaria, which was rampant in Mauritius almost immediately after their rescue. Their bodies, weakened by years of hardship, could not fight off the disease. They had survived 15 years on a desert island, but they did not survive their encounter with civilization. This case received wide publicity. It was talked about in Paris, pamphlets were printed, and debates were held in salons. In general, it made French society reflect on its attitude toward slavery. Not immediately, not abruptly, but something shifted in people's minds. A few years later, in 1781, the Marquis de Condorcet, one of the leading philosophers of the Enlightenment, recounted the tragedy of Tromelin Island to illustrate the inhumanity of the slave trade. He presented it in his book, Reflections on Negro Slavery, which became a manifesto of the abolitionist movement. The book advocated for the abolition of the slave trade and the system of slavery. The story of the Malagasy people became a symbol. Naturally, such an incredible story of long-term survival intrigued researchers. Since 2006, several archaeological expeditions have been undertaken to the island. Scientists wanted to understand, how exactly did they manage to survive for so long in such conditions? One of the expedition leaders stated, "They dug a well 5 meters deep. This would have required a huge effort, considering they had no proper tools. We also found many bones of birds, turtles, and fish, remains of their diet over the years. But one does not get the impression that these people were crushed by their situation. They didn't just survive, they lived in this place. They built a life, maintained a fire, watched the horizon. They had a purpose." Researchers also discovered an anonymous logbook. Presumably, it belonged to one of the crew members of the Utile. The entries are fragmented, many pages damaged by water and time, but key details about the first months on the island have survived. On the island, they found the coral huts. Their foundations are still visible in the sand. A few copper bowls, shards of pottery, a stone for sharpening knives. Simple things, but each was priceless for survival. Archaeologists also discovered traces of the observation platform, stone masonry on the highest point. From there, a view of the entire horizon opened up. For 15 years, someone climbed up there every day and looked out at the ocean. Over the years, Tromelin Island has changed little. A weather station was built there in the mid-20th century, a small building with antennas and instruments. Only 4 meteorologists live there, rotating every few months. The island is also a nature reserve, where sea turtles, including endangered species like green and hawksbill turtles, live and breed. They are protected and monitored by scientists. Surprisingly, this small sandbank has even become the subject of a dispute between France and Mauritius. They still cannot divide the territory and argue over who it rightfully belongs to. France considers the island its possession since the 17th century. Mauritius claims that upon gaining independence, the island should have been transferred to them. The dispute has dragged on for decades, over a tiny speck of sand in the middle of the ocean.